This evening I won't give the precepts like we normally do on the lunar observance day, since we'll be having an Anagārika Ordination. And since everybody's back, we'll, without further ado, we'll invite Kevin and Justin to come up. As the ordination proceeds, it'll be pretty self-explanatory, so they'll start with their chanting. Their Anagarika whites, which they'll be giving to me so I can check them.
Sambadu garawa sorajo pato Amboka sopa baja naidang sukarang agara ajawasata ekanta paripunang ekanta parisutang sangkalikitang brahmachariyang charitung yang nunahang ke samasung oharetva kasaya niwatta niyacha detva agarasama anagariyang babajeyang. The household life is cramped and dusty. The homeless life is free as air. It is not easy living the household life, to live the fully perfected holy life, purified and polished like a conch shell. Suppose I were to shave off my hair and beard, don the robes of a Buddhist monastic, and go forth from the household life into homelessness.
Okay, so having made the formal request, and that's a request from the suttas. And so even though you're not technically donning the robes of a Buddhist monastic, you're actually donning the robes of the white-robed Anagarika, but still you've shaved off your hair and beard, and so it's a first step toward ordination. So I hand over these whites, and they will, Justin and Kevin will go out and put them on. If somebody could put these sitting cloths up. So as Justin and Kevin leave to put on their whites and formally become Anagarikas, Anagarika just means one who's no longer living in a home or bound by a home. So even though we have good facilities here, we're technically homeless. don't have income. And so, but in Anagarika, they follow the 8 precepts just like any other guest in the monastery. And they still use money, cook, drive, so it's very much not just a position of practice, but also a position of service. And it's not always the case in Thailand that people become Anagarikas before ordination. So, for example, if somebody takes a temporary ordination, which is a custom in Thailand, then they might only become an Anagarika for a very short period of time, or there may not even be an Anagārika ordination. In the Wat Nong Pa Pong, or the Ajahn Chā Sangha, Ajahn Chā had the Anagārika ordination as a first step, where the candidate would wear white for a period of time. Partly it's a preliminary training to see if someone really wants to live long-term in the monastery, but also, especially here at Abhayagiri, the Anagarika is a position of service, working in the kitchen, managing the kitchen. And so, at least partly the idea is that if you're to become a novice or ultimately a bhikkhu, a Buddhist monk, take the full ordination, then we're completely dependent on the work and the generosity of others to support us, offer us food, keep us going, and also offer monetary donations to keep the facilities going. So the Anagarika is a position of service. So when the candidate eventually takes bhikkhu ordination, then they know firsthand just how hard it is to support others, to support the Sangha, and how hard people actually have to work. So you do that work at first, and then it's not like, oh yeah, you just got to put in your year and then you can take it easy. But it's like, as a bhikkhu, then you develop that appreciation and gratitude for the support that you're given. And it's so important to have that attitude and not to take it for granted. Part of the Ajahn Chā Sangha, or this particular lineage, it's actually against our standards laid out by Ajahn Chā to do fundraising. So we don't do fundraising. We don't go out, say, seeking support, seeking donations. And Ajahn Chā very much held and taught the ethos of if you're practicing well, the support comes, and if people want you to be there, you'll be supported, and that's very much how it works. So as the Anagarikas, it's very much a position of support and helping look after the Sangha. Then eventually, if they do choose to ordain, then it's like, okay, that's what I gave, now that's what they're going to receive. Of course, once you ordain, you still give a lot. There's still actually our practice and our whole life, in a sense, is a offering of service. But especially, say, the service of making food or managing the kitchen, that's a great training in and of itself, and a good preliminary practice for knowing, okay, this is what I'm going to be receiving later on. So as they come back in with their whites, they'll be formally requesting the 8 precepts. I'm always curious how people are going to look when they first put the whites on. It's definitely much different. Usually more different than you thought it would be. It's also mindfulness. Now every little spot is going to show up on those whites.
Ti saranena saha ata silani yachama dutiyampi mayang bante ti saranena saha ata silani yachama tatiyampi mayang bante ti saranena saha Ata silani yachama.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Buddhaṃ saranang gacchami.
Buddhaṃ saranang gacchami.
Dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dhammang saranang gacchami.
Sanghang saranang gacchami.
Sanghang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi buddhaṃ saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi buddhaṃ saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi buddhaṃ saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi buddhaṃ saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Ti saranakamanang nititang.
Amma bhante.
Panatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Panatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from taking the life of any living creature.
I undertake the precept to refrain from taking the life of any living creature.
Adina dana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Adina dana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from taking that which is not given.
I undertake the precept to refrain from taking that which is not given.
Abrahmacharya veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Brahmacharya veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from any intentional sexual activity.
I undertake the precept to refrain from any intentional sexual activity.
Musavada veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Musawada Veramani Sikapadang Samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from lying.
I undertake the precept to refrain from lying.
Sura meraya maja pamadatana veramani sikapadang samadhiyami.
Sura Merya Maja Pamadatana Veramani Sikapadang Samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from consuming intoxicating drink and drugs which lead to carelessness.
I undertake the precept to refrain from consuming intoxicating drink and drugs which lead to carelessness.
Vikala bhojana veramani sikapadang samadhiyami.
Vikala Bhojana Veramani Sikapadang Samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from eating at inappropriate times.
I undertake the precept to refrain from eating at inappropriate times.
Nacha gita varita visukadasana malaganda vilepana dharana mandana vibhusanatana veramani sikapadang samadhiyami.
Nacha Gita Vadita Visukadasana Mala Ganda Vilepana Dharana Mandana Vibhusanatana Veramani Sikapadang Samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from entertainment, beautification, and adornment.
I undertake the precept to refrain from entertainment, beautification, and adornment.
Ucha sayana mahasayana veramani sikapadang samadhiyami.
Ucha Sayana Mahasayana Veramani Sikapadang Samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from lying on a high or luxurious sleeping place.
I undertake the precept to refrain from lying on a high or luxurious sleeping place.
Imani atta sikapadani samadhiyami.
Imani atta sikapadani samadhiyami. Imani atta sikapadani samadhiyami. Imani atta sikapadani samadhiyami.
Imani atta sikapadani silena sugating yante silena bhoga sampada silena nibuting yanti tasama silang visota ye.
Sadhu Bhante.
Okay, you can sit comfortably and feel free to sit comfortably. You've taken that step for Kevin. It's been a long time coming. 10 or 11 years ago that you're wanting to start this process, but due to various obstacles and things happening, and so it's been a long time coming. And since it's when you ordain together, so one of you has to be, I have to choose that one of you is going to be senior to the other. And so usually the way we do that is the one who's been practicing longer and the one who's older gets to be junior. So, so Justin gets to be senior. So nothing personal. And generally we go through the precepts one by one in this, just to be very clear about the precepts. And this is the 8 precepts, what we call the renunciate precepts. And so the 5 precepts would be the precepts for lay practitioners. And then the 8 precepts, we add on some, and the 3rd precept becomes, it goes from refraining from sexual misconduct, which is the guideline for lay Buddhists or lay practitioners, it goes to the refraining from any intentional sexual activity or the complete celibacy. And one of the interesting things about, say, our group is that I like to think about is we're, you look at our Sangha, we've got this community here, and it's like a bunch of guys who've come into the monastery and taken on this training, and we're kind of trying to, as we go along, both the Anagarika's novices, junior monks, and even senior monks, we're just trying to still figure things out and practice, and in a sense we're kind of bubbling along, but at the same time we've got some of the strictest celibacy rules of any religion in the entire world, and so we follow them quite strictly, and we've got these very clear rules, these very clear standards. One of the things I really appreciate about the Buddha's formulation of the Vinaya, or the precepts, the standards of training, the Sikkhapada. So a Sikkhapada is like training, precept, training standard, and it's just so clear. It's not at all vague. It's so clear when if you do this, you can go to this point and it's not a transgression, but you go beyond this particular boundary or this particular point, and then it is a transgression of the precept. And these are not commandments, so it's not held in the same way that perhaps in some groups of Christianity it might be held. They're not commandments, but they're training guidelines, training precepts. So what happens when you break one or you wander outside of that boundary that's set for yourself through undertaking the precepts, then what you do is you make it known, or just let me know, or any of the other ajahns, whoever you feel inclined to trust with that information, that then you reveal that you, say, broke the precept, and you retake the precept. So that's how you rectify those situations. It's not that you break the precept and we tell you to get out of here, you got to leave. It's you are allowed to make mistakes. One of the things we learn is how to fail, how to make mistakes, and you will fail. It's to be expected. Everybody makes mistakes, but it's learning how to pick ourselves back up. So in the monks' rules, when we break a precept, it's called apati, which literally means to fall down. And then when we confess the precept to our fellows, our fellow bhikkhus, our fellow monks, then that's called being picked back up. So we get picked up. So the whole practice is as we live this spiritual life, and we're learning how to follow these strict precepts, which are difficult to follow and do bring up difficulties in the mind, and they highlight the desire systems and the suffering in the mind that we learn how to see and have insight into, then we're always falling down. And when we fall down, we need to be picked back up. And so that's the whole process. The first precept, the panatipata, that's the refraining from taking of life. So just little habits that we might have had before, like if a mosquito lands on us and we just automatically slap it and kill it, or a wasp. We see a wasp, we want to just roll up a newspaper and slam it. We don't do that anymore. So it's that cultivation. It's partly a cultivation of mindfulness, and it's partly a cultivation of compassion and just carefulness in the way we relate to not just other human beings, but all beings. Although we aren't say completely vegetarian here or anything, we do accept offerings of, say, cooked meat at the mealtime, because the Buddha allowed us to accept things that weren't seen, heard, or suspected that they were killed specifically for us. But the Buddha allowed people to offer whatever they have, and so that doesn't fall within the purview of, say, directly killing something. But at the same time, some of the members of the monastic community will choose to be vegetarian, but that's not mandatory, so that's not a breaking of the precept. But we don't directly kill things, and that's an important practice to get into. And it might seem easy at first, but then as time goes on, and especially when the horse flies and the surgeon flies start coming out in the summertime here, and they hurt a little bit more than mosquitoes, and it's really hard to, we might get irritated, and we might really want to slap them and get away from these things. So we have to be really careful with that. There's the second precept, which is the adina dana. That's refraining from taking that which is not given. So essentially refraining from stealing. So we learn how to be careful with, say, depriving others of their personal property. And we have to be very careful with this. This is a precept which highlights a mental quality we call, in Pali it's called abhija, or covetousness, and covetousness means when you see something that's not yours and you want it to become yours. That's called covetousness, or abhija. And so that precept can highlight that mental quality. And again, this is to be expected that these things will come up. These are very ingrained habits that everybody has, and these precepts start to highlight these things. So not to be too hard on oneself for having those mental tendencies, but at the very least we don't act on them, and we train ourselves to not act on them. The third precept, I've already gone over it, the brahmacharya, which is the celibacy, we also call the holy life, or the higher life. And this also is a difficult practice which takes time to get used to. And so these mental tendencies of say infatuation or longing or passion, they come like waves in the mind, and so when we don't give in to them, though, they do pass away. And then it's a process of actually training the mind to, they say in the Tibetan tradition, they say like pulling a hair out of butter is like pulling our mind out of the realm of sensuality and looking for happiness in different ways that isn't dependent on the senses, but is more dependent on wholesome mental states that we're cultivating through our various practices here in the monastery, meditation, generosity, and so on. The musawada, the refraining from lying, that's the new chanting book. I kind of prefer the old translation we had back in the day. Was musawada was I undertake the precept to refrain from false and harmful speech. And yes, lying is part of that, so we do refrain from lying. And when we refrain from lying, we're very transparent in our actions. And actually, say for a lot of the great ajahns in Thailand, they were actually very forgiving when people would be very upfront about the precepts they weren't able to keep, or that they were breaking, or mistakes they made, or even if they gave into their covetous mental state and stole something small or something like that. But if they confessed it, that's always appreciated. But if someone is lying or not being honest in their actions, that's what, say, like the ajahns in Thailand they would come down really hard on people for not being honest. And so that's a very, very important precept. But there's also the speech precept is actually fourfold. It's the fourfold right speech in the Noble Eightfold Path, which is to refrain from lying, but also to refrain from divisive speech, to refrain from harsh speech, and to refrain from idle chatter. And those four types of speech, the Buddha taught that they create bad kamma, which will lead to a sense of dis-ease in the mind, in the heart. The lying is obvious, why it leads to a sense of dis-ease. What did I tell to this person? I got to uphold that story. What did I tell to this other person? I got to uphold that story to them, and it falls apart pretty quick and becomes very tense. Then with the divisive speech too, it's like trying to divide people from each other, and what we want is speech that promotes concord and unity and not division. So divisive speech is also pretty obvious why it would create suffering and sense of disease. Harsh speech, giving into anger, using angry speech, using harsh speech. So we learn to have speech which is gentle, speech which is pleasant, and doesn't mean we can't be strong with somebody else if we have to tell somebody else, point something out to somebody that they maybe need to hear, but not reacting, not just blindly reacting with harsh speech. And then there's idle chatter, which is the one that we get asked about a lot. Why did the Buddha talk about this idle chatter? So the Pali for idle chatter is sambapalapa, which is a kind of onomatopoeia. You kind of get the meaning through how it's said, is sambapalapa, which is just like blah, 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 just you, and it's defined as speech which is useless. And so we tend towards silence or just speaking little, and we don't need to be engaging in speech which is useless. And actually, useless speech or sambapalapa, it's not actually that bad of kamma to engage in it. It's just tiny bad kamma, but because we do it all the time, it's like drips that eventually fill up a bucket. So we have to be careful with that one. And if you have sometimes people can get hurt by it too if we get carried away. So we have to be careful. There's the sura meraya, which is the refraining from. Literally, it's refraining from alcohol in the precept, in the wording of the precept. But the spirit of the precept is to refrain from any type of mind-altering intoxicant. Say particularly alcohol, which the Buddha said is the basis of negligence, but also drugs, specifically hard drugs. It's very clear that in this monastery we're not allowed to smoke marijuana or do any other type of drug. We do allow minor stimulants such as coffee. That's allowed in the monastery. But then, say these strong substances we wouldn't allow in the monastery. There's the vikalabhojana, that's eating only at the proper time. The proper time is defined as between dawn and midday. And right now we define that as it's roughly, dawn is we define as when you can go outside and see the lines in your hand at arm's distance. And so it's before sunrise. Right now it's probably about 6 a.m. or something, maybe a little bit before. And midday is when the sun is at its zenith, but we just pick a time. So right now it's 1 p.m. In the wintertime, when there's not daylight savings, then it's 12. So we can eat from dawn to 1 p.m. Outside of that time, we can have the allowables that are allowed in the precepts, things like the sugar and the drinks and so on. Those are allowable outside of that time. And then the seventh precept, entertainment, beautification, and adornment. That's we don't, except on very rare occasions, watch movies or listen to music. So we're cutting out a lot of that distraction that we normally seek when we have a sense of disease or we just feel like bored. Then we can actually seek out distraction. So when we cut that out, it actually really helps us to see the mind much more clearly. And in the monks' rules, specifically going to public shows, so samanas or religious seekers, we aren't supposed to go to, like, say, movie theaters, for example. And this is something just to be able to see the mind that much more clearly. And just little things like that sixth and seventh precept. So the vikalabhojana, not being able to eat at the inappropriate time, say when you weren't in the monastery, just little things that you would take for granted, like you could go in the afternoon to the refrigerator and make yourself a sandwich. Now you can't do that. And we've actually had somebody leave because they can't do that. And it's just, you take it for granted, but then when you can't do it, it's kind of like, or just going to the refrigerator and deciding you're thirsty on a hot afternoon and getting a glass of orange juice. It's like, no, you have to wait until the tea time or until the proper time when things are actually put out. So these things that we took for granted before, then suddenly it's like, well, I want a glass of orange juice, but I have to wait. You know? And they might not even put orange juice out at tea time. They might only put apple juice out, and it won't be satisfied. So these little things can bring up immense suffering in the mind over time. And it is kind of, it sounds funny, but actually when you're in it, it can be quite heavy and extreme, actually. And entertainment. There's little distractions that are allowable in the monastery, you know, the library. Or we might do some sort of study, wholesome distractions, where, or it might not even count as a distraction. If it's Dhamma, we're doing some sort of sutta study. But the distractions are kept. There's not really that many ways we can distract ourselves in the monastery, so it gets pretty refined. Ucha sayana mahasayana, that's the refraining from lying on a higher luxurious sleeping place, so we keep our sleeping place very, very simple. Some of the monks will just sleep on a yoga mat on the floor, on a hard surface. Some will even sleep in Thailand. Sometimes you just have a straw mat on a wooden floor, or sometimes you might use a thermarest. It really depends on your body. But we define higher luxurious sleeping place, anything where the bed legs are higher than 8 finger breadths is what's allowable for the monks. So the legs can be 8 finger breadths, but the cushion on top of that could be quite thick as well. But we generally we don't say seek out, like say we go traveling or something. A lot of times at a hotel room we end up either sleeping on the floor, or there might be a time and place where it's like going to be less burdensome for everybody to just use the bed just that one time or whatever, because that's another standard is learning how to be unburdensome, learning how to be low maintenance, easy to look after. So these are all spiritual qualities that we build up. Also the refuges. So there's the precepts I've gone over, but there's the refuges as well. So refuges and precepts are the foundation. You're building a very strong foundation for your first step. I like to think of Anagārika Ordination as the first step, the first gate of ordination, of the 3 gates of ordination. The Anagarika training, the novice training, the bhikkhu training. And refuges and precepts is you start building that really strong foundation. So at this point, I think I've sufficiently explained the precepts, and you can go into the formal taking of dependence, which I'll explain more about it afterwards. So.
Acharyo me bante hohi ayasmato nisaya vachami. Acharyo me bante hohi ayasmato nisaya vachami. Acharyo me bante hohi ayasmato nisaya vachami.
Opaikang.
Sadhu bante.
Pati rupang.
Sadhu bante.
Pasadikena sampadehi.
Sadhu bante. Ajata gedani tero mayang baro aham pitera sabaro. Ajata gedani tero mayang baro aham pitera sabaro. Ajata gedani tero mayang baro aham bitera sabaro.
Okay, so you can sit comfortably again. That's the final part of this short ceremony, the Anagarika Ceremony, is the formal taking of dependence. This is something which novices and bhikkhus do as well. The taking of dependence in this tradition, it's called nisaya, or dependence, and that's like you're declaring yourself as a student and wanting to learn. So that's acharya. Acharya in Pali means teacher, and that's where the word Ajahn is the Thai version of acharya. So Ajahn or acharya just means teacher. Acharyo me bante hohi ayasmato nisaya wachami. It's like, please, Venerable Sir, be my teacher. Allow me to take dependence on you. And then I say opayikang, which means like good. Pati rupang, it is well. Pasadikena sampadehi, it is proper. And then they do this chant. You've both done this chant. Ajattage dani tero, maihambaro, ahampi terasabaro. That means from this day forward, I am the burden of the. I acknowledge myself as being a burden on me, the elder. Tera is elder. And then also, so they say ajatake dani tero, maihambaro, ahampi terasabaro. So you are both my burden, and I am your burden. So you're going to help me out, and I'm going to help you out. So you're going to, as Anagarikas, you're going to cook for me and drive me places, and I'm going to help you out by pointing out all your faults. It will help you, I promise. And just helping you to learn and get on with this training, and help you out in terms of if there's difficulties, and just help you to develop that reflective mind. And it's not just me, though, that I'm conducting this ceremony, but also all of the Ajahns here, of course, Longpa and Ajahn Krunadamo, Ajahn Chinda, Ajahn Titapanyo, and the Sangha. So we have a very strong community here, and people will be pointing things out to you. There's going to be a lot to learn in the first few days, and it is a big change. And, putting on the whites, not just that you look much different, but that also you're going to be eating out of the Anagarika bowls now, so it's like a training alms bowl, and you're going to be eating in the dining hall, so these little practicalities, eating in the dining hall with the Sangha, and we eat in silence in the hall, and also just little things like you won't be able to go back for seconds, like you maybe were able to as a non-Anagarika. And so it's what we call the core wat. It's against the core wat to eat after we finish our bowl. We just have those two periods. We have the breakfast time and the main meal time, and we don't consume food after that. That's against our core wat. Core wat comes from the Pali kichavata, which means just etiquette and protocols. So there's a lot of minor core wats that you'll be learning about, regularly done observances, practices, which might not be really clear in the purview of the precepts, and there will be different things to study, like the 75 Sakya rules, the 30 rules about how to eat properly, just etiquette around eating. A lot of them are very obvious. Nobody's going to be, hopefully, tossing food up and catching it in their mouth, which is is one of the Sakya rules, one of the 30 food rules. But monks did do that, which is why, in the time of the Buddha, which is why he had to lay down that rule. Every single rule got laid down because of something that was done. The Buddha waited for it to happen, and then he said, "Oh, don't do that. You shouldn't do that. That's not proper." So every rule has an origin story. So believe it or not, monks were playing around, tossing food up and catching it in their mouths. And so the Buddha said, "Okay, that's not proper. You shouldn't do that." And monks were licking the food off their hands, and the Buddha said, "Okay, that's not beautiful. Don't do that." Monks were chomping loudly while they were eating. The Buddha said, "No, that's not beautiful, don't do that." Monks were slurping loudly while they were eating. So those are two more onomatopoeia rules. Slurping loudly is suru suru karakang, and chomping loudly is chapu chapu karakang. So not to suru suru or chapu chapu when you're eating. And we just eat slowly, mindfully, quietly, methodically. It's a great training, and it's very, very, very helpful. So the taking of dependence, a very lovely gesture, and having given offerings and taken the precepts, taken the dependence, and welcome to the Anagarika training. I think that's probably enough for now. So at this time, can invite you to, if you have any offerings for Longpor, to get up and formally pay respects to Longpor, and then we'll move your seats into where you're going to be sitting, and you'll be able to sit off to the side, and we'll close the evening then. So please, you can bow and then get up and get your offerings for Longpor. Sometimes the legs fall asleep as well, just little things. So if we could move these to wherever, maybe one on that side. Shay's been part of the ceremony. Okay, the cards are for you. A nice white doily. Wait. Put it on the left and bow first. Okay. Never mind. You can bow after. Okay, give it first then.
Welcome to the training, and just to certainly let me express my delight that you've set the intention to go forth and to test out the Sangha life. It's you have to test it out and be willing to, as Ajahn Ñāṇiko said, learn how to fail. And it's like one of the problems that we oftentimes have is just trying to get everything right all the time, and which doesn't mean that you should willfully look for ways to go wrong, but it's just natural, and so that patience is a huge piece of how to learn how to train ourselves as human beings. Just being patient, being kind, being generous to oneself and to together in community. It really, living with other human beings takes a lot of patience. And that's, that sense of kindness and generosity with each other is really an important skill to do externally, but to turning it inward as well, so that we really grow from that. And so being able to give yourself that opportunity, and also to finding the well. I mean, as human beings, we seek happiness, and I think that's that sense of going forth is just recognizing the limitations of the world. You've both been kicking around the world for long enough and tested out different things, you've tried out different things. But recognize that there's all sorts of different forms of happiness and well-being. And there's tremendous happiness to come from living a life of integrity, living a life of contentment, and living a life of discernment. It's really, really important to delight in that. So, offer my blessings and well wishes to the both.
So I think you're over there. I think you're over there. So normally this would be the lunar observance night, where there's the late night meditation vigil, midnight tea, 3 a.m. chanting. It's been a long day. Of course, if people want to stay up, they can. Except there's a fair amount of things happening tomorrow as well. I guess it's Easter as well tomorrow. But, there's Lumpur, Ajahn Ñāṇiko and myself, doing some traveling, having the meal away tomorrow. George is going to be returning home. So anybody who's driving, I ask you to please not stay up tonight, just for the safety, well-being of all of your passengers. But yeah, anybody else who feels like they would like to, it's optional. So the vigil will be optional tonight. So we'll close the evening with the verses of sharing and aspiration. That's Chanting Book Volume 1, page 33. Now let us chant the verses of sharing and aspiration. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, may my spiritual teachers and guides of great virtue, my mother, my father, and my relatives, the sun and the moon, and all virtuous leaders of the world, may the highest gods and evil forces, celestial beings, guardian spirits of the earth, and the Lord of death, may those who are friendly, indifferent, or hostile, may all beings receive the blessings of my life. May they soon attain the threefold bliss and realize the deathless through the good
is my noble guide. The Sangha is my supreme support. Through the supreme power of all these, may darkness and delusion be dispelled.